In this talk, we will learn about the origins, evolution, and classification of plants, which are eukaryotic organisms. All eukaryotes are grouped in the domain of eukarya. There is immense diversity among eukaryotes. Some are unicellular, while others are multicellular. There are 4 traditional kingdoms in the domain of eukarya. The first one is Protista. The organisms that belong to this kingdom that has now been abandoned are protists. The reason it has been abandoned is because the members are genetically very variable from one another, and hence this kingdom is not a monophyletic group. Fungi is another kingdom of eukarya, followed by Plantae, which includes organisms that are photoautotrophs. Animalia is the last or 4th traditional kingdom that is observed in the domain of eukarya. All organisms that belong to the kingdom of Plantae are multicellular and photoautotrophs. There are photoautotrophs because they have the ability to obtain energy from light that comes from the sun and make their own organic carbon compounds. Hence, they do not rely on other organisms for carbon sources. All organisms of kingdom Plantae belong to the superfamily of Archaeplastida. This is different from fungi and animals, which belong to the supergroup of Opisthokonta. In addition to plants, Archaeplastida includes the red and green algae, which are protists. Among the different groups of organisms in Archaeplastida, plants are more similar to green algae, which are protists. The 2 main types of green algae include the chlorophytes and charophytes. There is a lot of diversity among green algae. Some green algae are unicellular, like the Chlamydomonas species, while others can form colonies where individual cells aggregate together, as we can observe in volvox. It should be noted that even though the colony is multicellular, this is not true multicellularity. Now, there are green algae that do show true multicellularity, like the chlorophyte ulva. True multicellularity is seen in both chlorophytes as well as charophytes. In the case of true multicellularity, we are able to observe specialized cells that work together as a unit. Between chlorophytes and charophytes, plants are more closely related to charophytes. In fact, phylogenetic analysis has revealed that charophytes and land plants share a common recent ancestor. There are some similarities between the two as well, including both of them have the ability to perform photosynthesis because both of them are photoautotrophs. Plants and charophytes have cellulose as part of their cell wall, and the proteins that synthesize this cellulose are arranged in the form of rings on the plasma membrane. Both of them are also closely related based on nucleic acid sequences. Hence, charophytes and plants can be grouped into a clade, and the name of this clade is Streptophyta. Plants were one of the early organisms to colonize land. It is thought that the charophyte and plant ancestor grew in shallow waters and hence would encounter dry environments periodically. This ancestor then adapted to survive through these dry spells and eventually had the ability to live on land. Thus, the ability to live on land is a key innovation because it allowed the organisms to utilize resources and niches that it could not before. While charophytes and plants show many similarities, they also show differences. Some of these derived traits that are observed in plants include the presence of a haplodiplontic life cycle. Another name for the haplodiplontic life cycle is alternation of generations. All plants show alternation of generations. The haplodiplontic life cycle is also observed in chlorophytes. However, it's not observed in any of the extant charophytes that we see today. In the alternation of generations, we have a gametophyte, which is a haploid multicellular structure. It has the ability to make gametes through the process of mitosis. These haploid gametes can then fertilize or fuse with one another to produce a diploid zygote. This diploid zygote then undergoes mitosis to form a multicellular sporophyte. This multicellular diploid sporophyte then undergoes meiosis to give rise to haploid spores. These haploid spores can then germinate to give rise to the haploid multicellular gametophyte. This cycle is the alternation of generations. Another derived trait that's observed in plants but not in charophytes is the evolution of multicellular gametangia. Gametangia are haploid reproductive organs that are observed in the gametophytic stage of the plant. Their job is to produce gametes, and they can come in two main types. The male gametophyte gives rise to the gametangia that is called as an antheridia. The antheridia forms the male gamete, which is referred to as sperm. The female gametophyte, on the other hand, can give rise to female gametangia that are called as archegonia. The archegonia will give rise to the female gametes, which are referred to as an egg. Another derived trait is the formation of a multicellular diploid embryo. After fertilization, a diploid zygote is formed, which undergoes mitosis to give rise to a multicellular diploid embryo. This multicellular diploid embryo remains within the gametophyte of the plant. Eventually, it will give rise to the sporophyte, and it obtains its nourishment from the gametophyte. Since the embryo remains in the gametophyte in the plants that evolved first, plants are also called as embryophytes. The presence of apical meristems is another derived trait observed in plants that is absent in charophytes. Meristems are the stem cells of plants and can give rise to a wide variety of different cells. The apical meristems were the first meristems that evolved. They are present at the apex of the plant as well as the base of the plant. Apical meristems promote the growth of the plant in terms of length. The cells that make up the apical meristem are able to differentiate into different types of tissues. Plants evolved from an ancestor that lived in water. There are many advantages of living in water. Most living organisms are made up of 70% of water, and hence by living in water, the organism never has to worry about water loss. Water also filters ultraviolet light coming from the sun, and hence there is lesser damage to the DNA of organisms who live in water. Water is denser than air and hence it provides support to the organism. There is also an easy distribution and dispersal of reproductive cells in water. Plants adopted a more terrestrial lifestyle, and hence there should be some advantages of living on land. One such advantage is more access to sunlight and carbon dioxide. This allows the plant to perform more photosynthesis and hence generate more organic compounds. Similarly, there's more access to oxygen, and that results in more efficient respiration and energy production. There are also many untapped resources that were abundantly available at that time, which includes nutrient-rich soil. All these factors allowed plants to make the transition and become more terrestrial. The transition to living on land posed many different challenges, which include the plants being more prone to water loss or dehydration. They also needed to find a mechanism to absorb water in order to remain hydrated. With access to more sunlight, they're prone to more damage from the ultraviolet light that is present in sunlight. They also needed to evolve a mechanism for gas exchange, and were exposed to more dramatic changes in temperature. Finally, they needed more structural support in order to live on land. Plants came up with many different adaptations to overcome these challenges. The first plants were the non-vascular plants that are also called as bryophytes. They did not evolve vascular tissues that would allow the transport of water and nutrients throughout the plant. Hence, they are quite small in size compared to other plants. They live in moist areas so that they can get water easily, and this water is also needed for the sperm to find eggs during sexual reproduction. In the case of these non-vascular plants, the gametophyte is much larger in size and longer living than the sporophyte, and hence the gametophyte is considered as the dominant generation. Non-vascular plants can be classified into 3 phyla. This includes the phylum Hepatophyta, which includes liverworts, the phylum Bryophyta, which includes mosses, and the phylum Anthocerophyta, which includes hornworts. As time passed, plants evolved vascular tissues, which is considered as a key innovation. These vascular tissues allowed the transport of water and nutrients throughout the plant. Xylem is the vascular tissue that allows the transport of water and minerals, while phloem is the vascular tissue that allows the transport of nutrients from the leaves to different parts of the plant. Plants that have vascular tissues are called as tracheophytes. The vascular tissues are a key innovation because they allowed the plants to become bigger and more diverse, therefore allowing adaptive radiation to occur. The plants that evolved vascular tissues formed the first forests on Earth. The first vascular plants that evolved were the seedless vascular plants. In these plants, the sporophyte became larger and longer living than the gametophyte, and hence the sporophyte is the dominant generation. This is different than non-vascular plants where the gametophyte was the dominant generation. Seedless vascular plants possess true stems, leaves, and roots, which are the organs of a plant. They also evolved specialized or modified leaves called as sporophylls that are able to produce and bear spores. These spores are haploid and give rise to the gametophyte. It should be noted that the gametophyte does not have any vascular tissues. It is only the sporophyte that has vascular tissues. The seedless vascular plants still relied on moist environments because the sperm needed water in order to find the egg that were present in the archegonia, which is present in the gametophyte. Seedless vascular plants are classified into 2 phyla. Phylum Lycophyta includes seedless vascular plants like club mosses and spike mosses, while phylum Monilophyta includes ferns, horsetails, and other types of seedless vascular plants. Seedless vascular plants dominated the Earth's landscape during the Devonian and Carboniferous period, which is more than 400 million years ago. They formed the first forests. However, their diversity reduced during the Permian period because the environment started becoming more dry. Many seedless vascular plants died and became extinct and formed the coal that we actually use today. One similarity between seedless vascular plants and non-vascular plants is that the embryo is formed within the gametophyte. Over time, plants evolved a protective covering around this diploid multicellular embryo. This allowed the embryo to form a sporophyte outside the gametophyte. The multicellular embryo with the protective covering and nutritional stores is called as a seed. Seeds are similar to spores that are observed in non-vascular plants as well as seedless vascular plants, in that they both can withstand harsh conditions. However, since the seed has a diploid embryo, it is more resistant to mutations than spores are, which are haploid. The seed is able to protect the embryo because of the seed coat, which envelopes the embryo. The embryo has an inbuilt food supply in the seed and can remain dormant for many years and hence wait for favorable conditions. One big advantage of seeds is that they can be transported to long distances by different media. These include wind as well as animals. Thus, the embryo can be dispersed to many different locations farther away from the parent plant. Seed-bearing vascular plants are also called as spermatophytes. All spermatophytes belong to two clades. The first clade is the Gymnosperms, which evolved first. They dominated the terrestrial ecosystems during the Mesozoic era. One feature of Gymnosperms is that they do not make any fruits or flowers, but they do make seeds. The second clade are the angiosperms, which dominate most terrestrial ecosystems right now. They are flowering plants, and the plants produce a fleshy covering that surrounds the seed, which we call as fruit. Seed-bearing vascular plants have a much larger and longer living sporophyte, and thus the sporophyte is the dominant generation. Let us take the example of a pine tree. The tree is the sporophyte, while the gametophyte is the pollen grain, as well as the ovule, which is present in the pine cone of the tree. Thus, we can agree that there is a miniaturization of the gametophyte, and it is much smaller than the sporophyte. The haploid gametophyte now is formed within the sporophyte. This is different than what we observed in the earlier plants, where the sporophyte was formed within the gametophyte. In the case of seed-bearing vascular plants, the sporophyte has very well-developed organs which include the roots, the stems, and leaves. The gametophyte is actually formed in modified leaves called as sporophylls. Seed-bearing vascular plants have two types of sporophylls. One of them is a diploid microsporophyll that gives rise to haploid microspores. In the case of gymnosperms, they're in the form of cones, while in the case of angiosperms, the diploid microsporophyll is usually in the form of stamens. The microspores that arise in the microsporophylls form the male gametophyte. The male gametophyte is also called as a pollen grain. Pollen grains are very light and small and can be dispersed easily by wind, water, or animals. The male gamete is formed within the pollen grain. The second type of sporophyll found in seed-bearing vascular plants is the megasporophyll. The diploid megasporophyll produces an ovule. In the case of gymnosperm, the megasporophyll is in the form of a cone. Within the cone, an ovule is formed, while in the case of angiosperms, the megasporophyll is part of the flower called as the carpel, and within the carpel we can find the ovule. The megaspores are formed within the ovule, and the megaspore gives rise to a female gametophyte, which is haploid. The female gamete is formed within the female gametophyte inside the ovule, and hence fertilization of the male and female gamete occurs within the ovule. The ovule then forms the seed which protects the embryo within it. Gymnosperms are seed-bearing vascular plants that produce naked seeds. The seeds are called naked because there is no fleshy covering around the seed, and hence no fruits are formed. Most sporophylls present in gymnosperms form cone-like structures. All gymnosperms can be classified into 4 phyla. Phylum Cycadophyta includes the cycads that thrived during the Mesozoic era, but only few of them are present today. They look like palm trees and have the largest sperm cells. Phylum Netophyta includes 3 genera that are present today. All of them tend to be endangered. Phylum Ginkgophyta has only 1 living species present today, which is the ginkgo biloba tree. Phylum Coniferophyta, on the other hand, is the largest gymnosperm phyla and includes many different species. Most of them are evergreen and hence do not shed their leaves when the climate becomes cold. The largest tree, which is the sequoia tree, belongs to this phylum. Angiosperms are the most widespread and diverse plants that are present today. They all can be grouped into one phylum, which is Anthophyta. Angiosperms are plants that produce flowers, and from those flowers, fruits arise. The flowers are used for sexual reproduction, and the sporophylls are present within the flower. The stamens of the flower are the microsporophylls, which will ultimately give rise to the male gametophyte, which is the pollen grain, and within the pollen grain, the male gamete will be formed. The carpel, on the other hand, is the megasporophyll, and within the ovule of the carpel, we will have the female gametophyte being formed, which will then produce the female gamete. Fruits are formed from the flowers after fertilization occurs. In the case of angiosperms, the fruit is a seed with a fleshy covering. Thus, we have seen so far that plants arose from ancestral green algae around 470 million years ago. The first plants that arose were the non-vascular plants, or bryophytes, which include liverworts, mosses, and hornworts. With time, vascular plants evolved, and the first seedless vascular plants were the lycophytes and the monilophytes. As time passed, seed plants evolved, and the seed plants belong to 2 clades, which are the gymnosperms and the angiosperms. The evolution of chlorophyll was the key innovation, as it allowed organisms like green algae to become photoautotrophs. This is because chlorophyll promoted photosynthesis in these organisms. For plants to evolve from green algae, many more key innovations occurred that allowed them to become terrestrial. The first set of adaptations included the formation of a multicellular embryo, gametangia like Antheridion archegonia, and a cuticle, which is a waxy covering that prevents water loss. The next innovation was the evolution of stomata, which are openings that promote gas exchange. With time, plants evolved tissues as well as organs like stems, roots, and leaves. These tissues and organs provided much needed support in order to grow on land. It also evolved a dominant sporophyte, which was more stable than the haploid gametophyte and could resist mutations caused by ultraviolet radiation. With time, plants evolved seeds, and these seeds protected the embryo and promoted dispersal of the embryo to different locations farther away from the mother plant. Finally, flowers evolved, and these flowers promoted fertilization and made the process more efficient. From the flowers, fruits were formed, and the fruits promoted seed dispersal from many different types of organisms. Thus, many key innovations occurred while plants evolved to become to the organisms that we see today. With this, we come to the end of our talk, where we learned about the origins of kingdom Plantae, as well as how plants evolved with time. We learned about the key innovations acquired, as well as features of different groups of plants.